Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. It was just past 3 on a cloudy Thursday afternoon when I heard the knock at my door. I had been sitting in my sunroom, curled up with a mystery novel I'd read a dozen times already, the kind of book that felt like a familiar conversation. The tea on the side table had gone cold, and the wind had picked up just enough to rustle the leaves along the walkway out front. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hesitated for a second, peeking through the lace curtain. It was Daniel, my neighbor's son. Not a boy anymore, really. He must have been in his late 20s now. I remembered when he used to skateboard up and down the street, his laughter echoing through the neighborhood while his mother yelled for him to wear a helmet. I hadn't seen much of him since he moved to the city for work. He had always been polite, even as a teenager, a rarity these days. I opened the door, surprised. "Daniel?" I asked, holding the edge of the door with a cautious but warm smile. "Hi, Mrs. Ellison," he said, his voice a little deeper than I remembered. "I hope I'm not bothering you. I was visiting Mom and saw your car in the driveway. Thought I'd say hello." I felt an odd flutter in my stomach, not romantic, but not entirely maternal either. A strange mix of nostalgia and curiosity. "Not at all. Come in. It's been ages." He stepped inside, bringing with him the scent of rain and something woody, like cedar. It clung faintly to his jacket. I suddenly became aware of how quiet the house was. Too quiet. My husband had passed away 3 years ago. Since then, I'd grown accustomed to the silence, but in that moment, I noticed every tick of the wall clock and creak of the floorboards. "Would you like some tea?" I offered, motioning toward the kitchen. "If it's not too much trouble." I boiled fresh water, brushing my hair behind my ear, in a way I hadn't thought about doing in years. I glanced at my reflection in the kettle. Lines around my eyes, gray threaded into my dark hair, but still, something warm, something alive. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one my kids had spilled juice on, and carved their initials into when they thought I wasn't looking. Daniel looked around like he was revisiting a memory. "This house still smells the same," he said, a little smile forming at the corners of his mouth. "Old furniture and cinnamon," I replied with a chuckle. He grinned. "Exactly." We talked about the neighborhood, his job in Chicago, the traffic, his mother's recent obsession with indoor plants. I told him about my garden, my volunteer work at the library, the little things that made up my days. It was easy, natural. But beneath our words was a current, something I couldn't name. At one point, the conversation paused, and I found him studying me. "You always seemed different," he said suddenly. "Even when I was a kid, you were never like the other moms. You listened. You made people feel safe." I blinked. "That's kind of you." He leaned back, looking almost embarrassed. "Sorry, that probably sounds weird." "I didn't mean it that way." "No," I said, reaching for my tea. "It doesn't sound weird." There was another silence. Comfortable this time. He looked around the room again, as if searching for something or maybe grounding himself. Then he spoke, quieter now. "I came back because I needed to reset a bit. Things have been rough. I ended a relationship. Work's been stressful. I've been thinking a lot about who I am, what I want." I nodded, listening, not pressing. "You know," he continued, "when I think about real conversations, ones that meant something, your face pops up. You probably don't even remember, but once after my dad left, I sat on your porch and cried. You didn't say much. You just sat with me and let me be angry. I remember. said softly. I remembered the small frame of that boy, trying not to let the tears fall, but failing. I remembered wanting to fix everything, knowing I couldn't. He smiled, a little sadly. That stayed with me. I wasn't sure what to say. I felt a tightness in my throat that I hadn't felt in a long time, like someone had unlocked a drawer inside me I hadn't opened in years. You've grown into a good man, Daniel. He looked down, then back up. I'm still figuring it out. Aren't we all? I said, and we both laughed, the sound echoing through the kitchen. A slow rain began to tap against the windows, soft and rhythmic. He glanced at his phone, then set it face down on the table. I'm not in a rush to go, he said. I felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the tea. Not inappropriate, not uncomfortable, just a shared presence. Two people recognizing something familiar in each other. We moved into the living room, where the rain was louder against the windows. I lit the gas fireplace, more for company than for warmth. He sat across from me, one leg tucked under him, completely at ease. Can I ask you something personal? He said. Of course. Do you ever get lonely? I hesitated. Honesty felt right. Yes, not every day. But some days, it's a weight. He nodded. Me too. The space between us didn't feel like a gap anymore. It felt like a bridge. And then he said something that I didn't expect, something that shifted the air between us. I used to think you were the most beautiful woman on the street, not just because of how you looked, but because you made everything feel calm. I don't know why I'm telling you this now, but I just needed to say it. My breath caught for a second, not because it was inappropriate, but because it was honest, raw, and strangely comforting. Thank you, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. He looked like he wanted to say more, but instead he leaned back and watched the fire. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, the silence had changed. It no longer echoed, it hummed. And I sat there, unsure of what this meant, but certain of one thing. Something had shifted inside me. Something small, but undeniable. When he finally stood to leave, he lingered at the door. I don't know when I'll be back, he said. But if it's all right, I'd like to visit again. I'd like that, I replied. And I meant it. As the door closed behind him, I stood in the quiet for a long while, letting it wash over me. Something had been stirred that I hadn't felt in years. Not desire, exactly, but connection. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone in the world. I made another cup of tea, sat in the same chair, and looked out at the rain. His words echoed in my mind, like a gentle knock that didn't demand to be answered, only acknowledged. And I knew that this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. The next few days passed with a gentle unease I couldn't quite name. Not discomfort, just a lingering awareness, like my skin remembered the conversation long after my ears had stopped listening. I kept replaying his words in my head. I used to think you were the most beautiful woman on the street. It wasn't just flattery. It was the way he'd said it, without expectation, without charm. Just truth as he felt it. I didn't tell anyone about his visit. What would I have said? That my neighbor's grown son sat with me by the fire and reminded me of a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. That his honesty stirred something buried, something tender. No, this moment wasn't for sharing, not yet. It was for holding close. On Sunday morning, I was pruning my rose bushes out front when I saw his car pull into his mother's driveway again. My heart did a small, involuntary skip. I tried to focus on the thorns, but I felt him approach before he said a word. "Hi again," he said casually, holding a coffee in one hand, the other tucked into his jacket pocket. "You're becoming a regular around here," I teased. "I take that as a good sign." He smiled, and then held up the second cup he'd been hiding behind his back. "I brought you one, if you still take it black." I laughed, wiping my gloves on my apron before taking the cup. "You remember that?" "I remember a lot," he said. We sat on the porch this time. The clouds were thinner, light breaking through in slow beams. Birds chirped from the trees above, and the breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass from down the block. "So," I asked, sipping the coffee, "have you figured out what you came home to reset?" He looked out over the street, thoughtful. "Some of it. I think I needed to be reminded of where I came from, and maybe who I've been trying to become." "That's a lifelong job," I said gently. "We're all still becoming." He nodded. "You seem to have it figured out." I smiled faintly. "Only on the days I remember not to chase perfection." He looked at me then longer than before. The quiet stretched but didn't break. His gaze held something deeper this time. Not admiration, but understanding. "I know this probably sounds strange," he said, "but sitting with you last week, it calmed something in me. Like I'd been holding my breath for months and finally exhaled." I didn't know what to say. I felt it too. That same exhale. That same release. It didn't feel strange to me, I admitted. "I thought about calling," he continued, "but I didn't want to make anything awkward." "Daniel," I said, his name tasting familiar now, like a word I used to say often, but hadn't in a long time. "I'm not afraid of awkward. Life is awkward, but I am careful. I've learned to be. I respect that." He stood then, walked to the edge of the porch, and looked up at the sky. "Do you remember when I fell off my bike in front of your driveway? I was 10. I skinned my knee and cried like a baby." "You didn't cry like a baby," I corrected. "You cried like someone who was hurting. You didn't tell me to be tough. You cleaned it and gave me lemonade. Then you told me it was okay to be soft." I blinked away the sudden wetness in my eyes. "You were the first adult who made me feel like I didn't have to hide anything," he said. The weight of that sat with me, not because of the compliment, but because I had forgotten how much simple kindness could matter. He turned back toward me. "Would it be all right if I stopped by again tomorrow?" I hesitated, not because I didn't want him to, but because I wanted to understand what this was becoming. A part of me wanted to protect the line between something tender and something too complicated. But a louder part, quieter in logic, louder in soul, wanted to say yes. "Yes," I said. "I'd like that." And so he came the next day, and the day after, sometimes for coffee, sometimes just to sit. We talked about everything and nothing, about books, about the news, about my husband, whom he remembered fondly, and about his own father, who hadn't called in years. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't flirtation. It was real. And then one evening, just after the sun dipped below the trees and the porch light came on automatically, he told me something I hadn't expected. "I've started therapy," he said. "Last week." I didn't want to say anything until I was sure. I looked at him, my heart swelling in quiet pride. "That's wonderful." "I was scared," he admitted. "Scared I'd feel stupid, or worse, exposed. But every time I got nervous, I thought of you." "Me?" He nodded. "Yeah, because if I could talk to you and not feel judged, then maybe I could do the same with someone trained to help." I reached over then, just briefly, and placed my hand over his. It was warm, steady, grateful. "You're doing something brave," I said. "It takes courage to look inward." He looked down at our hands, then back at me. "You've helped me more than you know." I didn't let go. Not yet. "I think," I said quietly, "we've helped each other." That night, after he left, I didn't feel alone. I felt seen. And more than that, I felt part of something again. It wasn't a romance. It wasn't anything you could explain easily in a sentence. It was deeper than that. Two souls meeting in a quiet place where time slowed down and the world made just a little more sense. And I knew, whatever this was, it was far from over. The week after that brought rain, steady, comforting, rhythmic. The kind of rain that makes you want to stay in pajamas and bake something that fills the house with memory. I was kneading dough for cinnamon rolls when I heard the soft knock again. It had become a pattern now. No need for phone calls or texts. He simply came when he needed to, and somehow it was always when I needed company too. He stepped in with a shiver and a sheepish grin. "Smells like heaven in here." "I hope you like cinnamon," I said, brushing flour off my hands. "I grew up loving it. You ruined me for store-bought rolls, by the way." "Good," I replied. "Means I did something right." He took off his jacket, hung it by the door like he'd always belonged, and joined me in the kitchen. I handed him the tray of dough spirals and gestured toward the oven. "Want to do the honors." As he slid the tray in and set the timer, I caught myself watching him. There was something grounding in the way he moved through my space, gentle, present. Not performing, not pretending. It made my chest ache in a quiet, aching way I couldn't name. We sat at the table while the oven did its work, the windows fogging slightly from the warmth inside. Outside, the world blurred behind the drizzle. He leaned back in his chair, sighing. "Therapy's been weird. Good, but weird." "Unpacking years of yourself will do that," I said. He nodded. "It's like pulling up floorboards and finding things you forgot you buried, and some things you didn't know were there." "And are you glad you're doing it?" "I am. I feel lighter, a little more clear." I gave him a gentle smile. "You seem more rooted, calmer." "That's partly you," he said, eyes holding mine longer than before. Something in that moment shifted again. Not rushed, not uncomfortable, just a truth surfacing. "You know, I've talked to my therapist about you." That caught me off guard. About me? About what these visits have meant to me. How they've helped me feel safe again. That maybe healing doesn't always happen in offices or textbooks. Sometimes it happens in kitchens with someone who really sees you. I looked down, unsure what to say. His words were a gift I hadn't asked for, and yet they filled a space in me that had felt empty for years. "I never thought," I said slowly, "that this part of my life would hold new beginnings. I thought I was in the season of reflection." He reached for my hand, this time without hesitation. "Maybe it's both." The oven timer went off, but neither of us moved right away. Later, after we'd devoured 2 cinnamon rolls each, and the kitchen had quieted again, he stood up. "I want to show you something," he said. He pulled out his phone, opened a photo, and handed it to me. It was a sketch, a rough pencil drawing of my front porch. The rocker, the overgrown roses, the crooked welcome mat, and in the corner, me, head tilted back slightly, a soft smile on my lips. "You drew this?" I asked. "I did. After our second visit. I couldn't sleep, so I just let it out. It was beautiful, not perfect, not polished, but full of feeling, like he had drawn it with his heart, not just his hands. It's lovely. It's you, he said. How you are to me. Steady, warm, real. Tears pressed at the edges of my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Instead, I looked up at him, my voice barely more than breath. Daniel, I don't know what this is becoming, but I do know it's real and meaningful. I don't need to define it, he said. Not yet. I just need you to know I care about you deeply. I stood, walked toward him, and let my hand rest against his cheek. His eyes closed briefly at the touch, like he'd waited for it without realizing it. We stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in something tender, something unspoken. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how a young man who used to ride his bike past my house could now be the one unraveling something so carefully guarded in me. It wasn't about age or propriety or logic. It was about presence. The way he listened, the way he saw me, not as someone older, not as someone past her prime, but as someone still becoming, still worth discovering. And I knew, even as I stared into the dark, that life was offering me something unexpected. Not a replacement for what I'd lost, but a different kind of light. One I hadn't realized I missed until it found me again. The following week felt suspended in a quiet kind of anticipation. I went about my routines, grocery runs, tending the garden, checking in at the library. But everything was laced with a new kind of energy, like I had been walking through life half asleep and had finally woken up. I caught myself humming while folding laundry, pausing longer at the window just to see if Daniel might show up. And then one evening, just after dinner, he did. He didn't knock this time. He texted, "Can I come by? Just want to talk." My reply was quick, always. When he arrived, I noticed the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. He looked like he'd had a long day. I met him at the door, my cardigan already pulled close around me from the breeze that had picked up. "You okay?" I asked softly. He nodded, stepping inside. Just needed a place that felt quiet and honest. "Then you came to the right house," I said, and he gave me a tired smile. We sat in the living room, the only light coming from the floor lamp near the corner. I brought him tea, chamomile this time, and he cradled the mug with both hands like he needed the warmth to anchor him. "I had a tough session," he said finally. "We talked about things I've avoided for years, stuff with my dad, stuff I thought didn't matter anymore, but it does." I didn't interrupt. I knew the weight of saying something out loud for the first time. "I guess what I'm realizing," he went on, "is how much I've carried other people's expectations. How I've shaped myself into someone I thought I was supposed to be, at work, in relationships, even around friends. And the more I untangle it, the more I feel like I'm not sure who I am underneath it all." I looked at him, this young man who had always seemed so put together, and felt something deep inside me soften. "You're someone who's brave enough to look," I said. "That's more than most people ever do." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm scared," he admitted, "that when I peel it all back, there won't be anything there worth holding on to." I reached out then, not thinking, just feeling. I rested my hand over his again, gently but firmly. "There will be," I said, "because underneath all the layers, there's always something real. It might be quiet, it might be fragile, but it's there." He looked at me then, his eyes damp but steady. "You always say the right thing." "No," I said. "I just say the truth. And sometimes the truth is the only thing we really need." The silence between us wasn't empty. It was full of understanding, full of emotion that neither of us had to name. And then quietly he asked, "Can I tell you something without it sounding strange?" "Of course. I don't just come here because it's peaceful or because you listen. I come here because you remind me of who I want to be." I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. That doesn't sound strange at all. He looked down at our hands, still resting together on the blanket between us. "I've felt things here I haven't felt in years. Comfort, safety, but also something more, something I don't quite understand yet." My pulse quickened, but not with fear. It was a recognition, a resonance, that same feeling I'd been wrestling with for days. "Daniel," I said gently, "this space between us, it matters, and it's precious. Whatever it is, it deserves to be handled with care." "I know," he said softly. "That's why I'm saying this now, so it doesn't get buried or confused. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know." His honesty settled in the room like candlelight, soft, flickering, and warm. "I'm grateful for you," I said, "and for whatever this is. You've reminded me that connection doesn't follow rules or timelines. It just is." He nodded, and then he did something simple and profound. He leaned in and rested his head lightly against my shoulder. No pressure, no demand, just presence. I let my cheek rest against the top of his head, my hand brushing gently through his hair. We stayed like that for a long time. No words, no questions. Just two people across time and life experience, finding stillness in each other. And as the rain began to fall outside once more, I realized something deep in my bones. There was still room in my heart for this. Not for complication or fantasy, but for truth, for kindness, for whatever form of love dared to grow gently, slowly, between two people who simply needed to be seen. And I wasn't afraid of it. Not anymore. The leaves had started to turn by the time Daniel visited again. Autumn came slowly in our neighborhood, first as a hint in the air, then as a golden hush across the trees. My porch was littered with fallen leaves, and the wind had that familiar crispness that made you reach for a sweater even when the sun was out. He arrived just after lunch, carrying a small brown bag. "Apple cider donuts," he announced, lifting the bag like a trophy. "Still warm." "You're spoiling me now," I teased, stepping aside to let him in. "I consider it a fair exchange. You offer peace. I bring pastries." We sat in the sunroom this time, our legs curled under us, the bag open between us. The donuts were sweet and soft, and the cinnamon clung to our fingers. The light streamed through the windows in long beams, catching in the dust motes and making the whole room feel suspended in time. We talked, as we always did, about little things. He told me about a new project at work, and I told him about a book I couldn't put down. But I sensed he was circling something, the way you circle a pond before deciding whether to wade in. Finally, he looked at me, more serious than usual. "I've been thinking a lot about how we carry people with us. Not physically, but in our choices, in our fears, in what we stop ourselves from doing." I nodded, understanding more than I could say. I've realized I've spent years chasing things I thought would make others proud. And in doing that, I ignored what I actually needed. I got into relationships that looked right, not ones that felt right. He paused. I waited. And then I started spending time here. with you. My breath caught, but I kept my expression soft. You made me remember what it's like to be really seen, not for my potential, not for how I perform, just me. His voice trembled slightly at the edges. I used to think love was this dramatic thing, fireworks, intensity. But being with you, even just sitting across from you, has made me realize that the quiet things matter more. The way you pour tea, the way you listen, the way you let silence be okay. I felt tears sting at the corners of my eyes, but I didn't look away. I know there's a lot between us, years, expectations, what other people might think. But I also know this, what I feel here, in this house with you, it's real. And I don't want to ignore that. He reached across the table and took my hand in his. His touch was gentle, his eyes steady. I'm not asking for anything more than what feels right for you, but I needed you to know how much you mean to me. I was quiet for a moment, letting his words settle. Then I looked at him, not as the boy I remembered from the neighborhood, not as the younger man across the years, but as the person in front of me, offering something true. Daniel, I said softly, I never expected this. And I won't lie, it scared me at first. Not because of you, but because I didn't think there was still a part of me open to being this. Moved. I squeezed his hand. But you've awakened something I thought had gone quiet for good. You've reminded me that connection doesn't come on a schedule, and it doesn't follow rules. It shows up when it's ready, and all we can do is decide whether we're brave enough to meet it. He leaned forward then, slowly, his eyes asking long before his lips ever moved. And when he kissed me, it wasn't urgent or uncertain. It was gentle, reverent, a kiss filled with all the quiet truths we had shared, all the small understandings that had grown between us. When we pulled back, neither of us said anything for a while. We didn't need to. That evening, we sat on the porch with a blanket across our legs and the wind rustling the trees. The sun dipped behind the rooftops, casting the sky in amber and rose. I rested my head on his shoulder. He laced his fingers with mine. In that moment, I didn't feel older. I didn't feel afraid. I felt alive. And not in the way youth pretends to promise, but in the way wisdom eventually understands, through presence, through stillness, through choosing to love gently and without condition. This connection wasn't meant to be explained. It was meant to be felt. And as we sat there, wrapped in the hush of a quiet evening, I knew this wasn't the end of something beautiful. It was the beginning again, only this time on our own terms. Quietly, carefully, but fully.